You watch these police shows or all these men, and then you see some of these women that aren't very feminine per se, and that don't wear like fancy shoes and do all of these things. But there are women like that. But we're just not putting ourselves out there, I guess you could say. So it's quite intimidating for a woman to want to be a law enforcement officer because of that standard alone. It can be very nerve-wracking to the soul if you're a short female trying to tell him to lock down. So you have to do what works for you. And I think a lot of that comes with experience and mentorship. I don't think you have to come out here blazing out and trying to be somebody that you're not at all. When I watched the Netflix show, I was crying at watching myself. I was like, this lady's amazing, And I'm like, this, that's me, right? Because I really felt like it's going to hurt. You put effort into your life. Like, it's a lonely road sometimes being a woman in any profession.
Yeah.
But all that hard work does pay off and really makes a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Women make up for only 12% of sworn officers and 3% of police leadership in the United States. Despite the dismal numbers and endless challenges to grow in their career, female law enforcement officers play an indispensable role in shaping a more balanced, just, and effective police force. But the law enforcement of 2024 is not the same as the agencies of the past. Many agencies have made it their goal to recruit more women. Today, there are many role models in law enforcement who serve as beacons of hope, offering inspiration not only to victims seeking justice, but also to those aspiring to join the force. My guest today is one such role model whose tenacity and determination has inspired countless women and has given hope. Lieutenant Misty Carausu. Misty has served in the Alameda County Sheriff's Office for over 19 years and risen through the ranks to become a lieutenant. You may have seen her in Netflix's viral docu-series, The American Nightmare, where we witnessed how Misty's determination brought justice to victims and provided reassurance to many women around the world, knowing there are officers like her who have their backs. Today, Misty will share with us her journey to becoming a police officer, what it takes to have a career in law enforcement, and her advice for all those women out there who aspire to join the force. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandey. Hi, Misty. Welcome to Career Calling.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
I'm really honored to have you on my show. You're such a role model for youngsters who are really looking at law enforcement as a career. So I'm really thrilled to learn about your journey and then explore the profession itself.
I'm here for any questions you may have.
So early on in February, I started noticing on Twitter this whole chatter about the now viral Netflix documentary. And I went ahead and, of course, watched it. And it was such an important story to be told, in my view, not just because of the story in it, but also the hope it gives you to know that there are officers like you. And there's something that really caught my eye at that time. That was this expression that I saw repeatedly on Twitter that, of course, it had to be a female officer. So that made me curious, and I went and tried to look at some statistics. And Statistia, one of the data, provides data on a lot of different markets. There I found that there are about, this was I think 2021 or so, about 13% of officers are female. And what was even more disappointing is that, according to it, it has declined in the last several years from somewhere around 18% to 13%. So I do hope that with this episode, I can inspire a few young women. So to start with, let's break it down. We know law enforcement. We think we know what happens in law enforcement. What do law enforcement officers do? But I really would like you to break it down. What does the day in the life of a law enforcement officer looks like?
So it really depends on if you work for a city law enforcement agency or a sheriff's office, which is county agency. The county does a lot of different, I guess you could say, ancillary positions. We do a lot in our agency. We work in unincorporated areas of Alameda County. We have the coroner's office. We are in charge of one of the largest jails on the West Coast, Santa Rita Jails, where I'm currently located. And we have a bunch of different contracts with other cities, other entities, like the airport over in Oakland, and we provide law enforcement services. So it really just depends on where you're looking. If you would rather work for a city where you will go straight to patrol, you will have to complete a field training program after you complete a 6-month basic police academy. So in my case, I was hired on with the sheriff's office. I had never applied for any other law enforcement agency. I really didn't even know if I was going to be a police officer. It wasn't something I grew up saying, I want to be a police officer. It just, the way the world worked for me was I got recruited by the late Sheriff Plummer of Alameda County, and I actually did really well in the academy, and the rest was history. But for our agency, we start off at the jail as opposed to going straight to patrol. And it's interesting. So it has its pros and cons. Pros being you learn how to communicate effectively with criminals, people who do not have education past maybe even elementary school. You learn how to communicate with people who have behavioral health issues. So for me, that was extremely important. And when I was able to go to the field training program, I was able to communicate effectively with the community that I was patrolling. It also did help. It helped me because I grew up in the same community that I was patrolling. So my friends and my family were all in the same community, and that was wonderful. But a day in the life is very different depending on where you're actually working.
Is it also different where you start and how you grow in the rank based on the agency?
Absolutely. So our agency is huge. I think right now we have over 800 sworn staff members. That's 800 officers.
Okay.
And that's, so that's starting from deputy level all the way up our chain of command to our sheriff. So in between a deputy and a sheriff, there's about 800 employees. So being a woman in this agency is extremely hard because you have to definitely put yourself out there because we don't have that many opportunities like we did in the past to promote, to go to patrol, to do a bunch of other things than just sit in a housing unit. So for our agency right now, we're really trying to strive on recruiting women into law enforcement because there's such a need for women. Twitter says it had to be a woman, right? But to go through the ranks, it's pretty difficult in our agency right now. But other agencies, it just depends on promotional availabilities.
Tell me a little bit more about that. You said it is harder to get the opportunity to patrol. Does your field work define your career progression in this field? Like patrolling and then being out there in the community? Does it play a big role, or is there a more well-defined path to grow in the agency?
So in our agency, you can actually spend your whole entire career working in the jail and going and being transferred to the courts because we also provide Alameda County court services. So you don't ever have to touch a patrol car ever in your career if you didn't want to. But if you did want to go out and provide the community services, you have to really show and put forth the effort that you are going to be proactive in your approach, go on ride-alongs, go speak to supervisors, get your face out there, because if you sit stagnant, it's easy to get lost in such a large group of staff that we have here.
Makes sense. One of the peculiar things that I found when I was researching what questions people are asking who are interested on the internet was, how do you become a female police officer or female law enforcement officer? I found it peculiar because nobody asks, how do you become a female software engineer?
right?
How do you become a female software engineer?
Yeah.
Right?
So, yeah,
Just
it's not like that gender association. It almost made it sound like there is a different set of criteria. There is a different set of rules to become a female law enforcement officer. Like it wasn't like, how do I become a law enforcement officer? It was, how do I become a female law enforcement officer? Maybe you can break that myth. Does it differ between male and female applicants? Can you tell a little bit about it? What is the criteria?
So for California, it's all standard across the board, female versus male. But I don't know why they like to separate the women versus the men. I don't know who actually started that. I'm assuming that it's a systemic issue that men created because women just came along into the field. But there's nothing different. So I went through a police academy with 6'5" men, and I'm barely pushing 5 foot. So I had to jump over the fences. I had to do the same defensive tactics, shoot the same exact handgun. I didn't get any help from anybody, no handouts. So for law enforcement, it's extremely fair across the board. I will say though, like as this Netflix has appeared and I've been contacted a lot and working with my own agency, there are a lot of differences in the female health wise. Like our hormones are different. Our physique is different. I'm not going to be trying to build a lot of muscle mass, whereas there's men out there that want to build a lot of muscle mass. So our nutrition is different. So I think for women, we have different dietary and health needs as opposed to men, but physically across the board, education wise, it is all the same.
I'm glad to hear that because I figured that much, but I really found it very amusing that it starts at that notion, right? Like, how do I become a female police officer? So,
Yeah. And I think it's quite intimidating, right? As a woman, because you see the SWAT members, you watch these police shows or all these men, and then you see some of these women that aren't very feminine per se, and that don't wear like fancy shoes and do all of these things. But there are women like that, but we're just not putting ourselves out there, I guess you could say. So it's quite intimidating for a woman to want to be a law enforcement officer because of that standard alone. It's definitely a machismo career. I always call it a man's world, and I'm just in it. I'm changing, obviously, my mindset because that's totally different.
Yeah.
But for women, I can see the intimidation because just for our basic physical abilities test to get into the academy, you have to drag a 185-pound dummy. And when I started, I was barely pushing 110 pounds. So I was watching men come in and pick this dummy up and drag him across like 40 feet. And I thought I could do that, and I couldn't. I legitimately had to squat down and drag him. So for women, it's very intimidating because you're like, how do I jump over a 6-foot fence? But there's techniques that we can use to jump over that fence very easily without injuring yourself. So when people ask like, how does it to become a female? It's just, I think they're just intimidated because it's the unknown and the perception that the media puts out there about us.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's go back and unpack a little bit about the qualifications and the education. So this is one of the careers where what type of college degree you have or majors you have doesn't really play a role. Am I right? Can you tell a little bit about what kind of education background is a minimum requirement?
So for California, I think it's dependent on the agencies, but a lot of agencies, all that's mandated is a general education diploma. So all you have to have is a GED. You don't have to have a high school diploma. There are a lot of deputies and officers that come into it with just a high school degree, but throughout their career, they actually go back to college and they get their degrees in criminal justice administration so they can promote throughout the ranks because that does really help.
Okay.
My instance, I was very blessed as a teenage mother. I was able to financially go to a 4-year college and graduate and get my degree, but my degree is in liberal studies.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So it's just like, had nothing really. I mean, it can apply to law enforcement, but it wasn't. I didn't know what I wanted to be. So you can go to college, or you don't have to go to college.
Mhm. So after that, what's the application process like? So the education is GED, but are there any physical requirements?
So you have to take, I think it's the post appellate B, which is, I think you have to run a 400 meter. Don't quote me on this, but they can go on the California Post website
Mhm.
to get the actual standards. You have to do a minute sit-ups, push-ups. You have to do an obstacle course. You have to jump a cyclone fence, a wooden fence, and then you have to run a sprint around, I think, a 400-meter sprint.
Mhm. This is in the academy or even to get into the academy?
Just to get into the academy.
Okay.
So when you decide you want to go through it, you have to go online, see if the position's available. When you apply, you have to give all of your background history to them and then take a written test, and then you have to take the physical. And
Mhm.
once the background's completed and you qualify, then you get the letter saying, congratulations, welcome to the 6-month academy, good luck.
And in the academy, is it pretty much like you were pushed into the rigor or you get any sort of a preparation to it?
It just really depends on the agency that's hiring you. So
Mhm.
for our agency, because we're the regional training center for Northern California.
Mhm.
So a lot of other agencies send their recruits through our training.
Mhm.
So for Alameda County, if you're interested in becoming a law enforcement officer, we actually have staff that work with you that prepare you to complete these tests because they're not really easy. I've seen a lot of recently women and men try to do the test and coming in very unprepared, and
Hmm.
then they just don't do well, and then they get discouraged and then walk away.
Hmm.
So, and that's really disheartening because if we can help you prepare in all of these aspects, then you'll succeed and then hopefully graduate the academy as a law enforcement officer. So
Mhm.
we're doing really good on that.
Mhm. And it's always a 6 months or is it a variable length?
Always 6 months. You have to do scenario-based training. You have to do written tests, lots of reading, dialogue, physical exercise. We definitely put you in the best shape of your life. That was my favorite part about it. We do shooting at the range. We do defensive tactics. We do driving skills. So there's a lot that we push in a 6-month period to help you graduate with your basic standard, like how to be an officer. I mean, there's a
Right.
lot more after you graduate to in my opinion, to learn from, but we give
Mhm.
you the standard.
Mhm. Is it pretty much during your academy time you decide, first of all, do you get to decide which department do you go into, or is it during that time, or it is just like you're just placed into based on where you're excelling?
So it depends on if you filed like through, like for me, I had to apply for the Alameda County Sheriff's Office.
Mhm.
And once they hire you, they give you a conditional hiring.
Hmm.
And then once you go through the process and graduate the academy, then you're working for Alameda County Sheriff's Office, right? So, but if you don't, you can apply to be a non-affiliate and put yourself financially through the academy.
Hmm.
So like myself, I was hired on by the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. I got paid by them when I went through the academy. Or if I didn't, I could be a non-affiliate and then I had to pay for myself. So there's two options. And then
Hmm.
there's other options too, where you can go to a college and take night classes and night academies. There's all different sorts of ways to actually become a police officer.
Mhm.
I am just familiar with what I went through. I didn't
Okay.
go to a different academy or through the night academies at the
Mhm.
college.
You mentioned about working in the jail or different types of work. When does that get decided, or is it like fixed for an agency where you start after coming out of the academy?
So for the sheriff's office, because we are responsible for the coroner's office
Mhm.
and the jail, we send the majority of all of our brand new graduates
Mhm.
to the jail so they can go through their jail training operations, and then they can go out. And if we need them to go to patrol and there's a vacancy, then they would be selected to go there. For other law enforcement agencies like cities, you just automatically go through a field training program,
Mhm.
which is your patrol.
We will go into more details of it. But before that, I want to come back to your journey. Like the whole academy sounds definitely so rigorous, involved, intimidating. And you mentioned that you didn't really plan on becoming a police officer. So how did you end up here? Such a physically demanding career. Tell me about your journey. What is that moment that changed it for you?
So I was 15 and a half when I got pregnant. And it shocks people because my son's going to be 27 this year.
Oh,
And I was 16 when I had him. My mother told me that she would support me and my son if I remained in school. And then after high school, I didn't know what I was going to do. So my mother supported me. I went through high school, graduated on time. And then afterwards, my goal was I'm going to age myself a bit. But there used to be this big company called Hill Business College where you basically went there, you got an AA certificate, and you could become a secretary. And I thought, maybe I'll do that.
mm-hmm.
But at the time, Governor Gray Davis really was pushing for education. And so he had given opportunities to people in my position, single mothers, and really wanted us to be successful in our lives. So we wouldn't rely heavily on government funds or anything in that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So filed for financial assistance. I submitted all of my documents and I got accepted to Chabot College, which is a junior college.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pushed through. I had a 4-year plan because I was like, I have this baby. I got to get paid. Long story short, I graduated in 4 years with my degree. I took my son to every class I could, especially during the summertime because I was working 2 jobs and I didn't have daycare. So he would come with me and the teachers were fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was working at Safeway at the time and the late sheriff's wife would come in and she would always say, what are you going to do? And I was looking at an IRS special agent job,
Mm-hmm.
but I am not a mathematician. I do not like accounting. I think it's dry, but the special agent part really reached out, like it really like caught my interest. But then I would be 6 months away from my son over in Virginia training, and I didn't want to do that. And so she said, why don't you apply with my husband? So I applied for the sheriff's office, and I was told before I even got into the academy, run with rocks. And I didn't understand what that meant. So I grabbed these boulders, these river rocks, and all I did for probably 3 or 4 months was just run uphill, downhill, on the streets, around a track, wherever I could with these big rocks. And I had no idea why. They just said, run with rocks. And I got accepted and went into the academy and I actually enjoyed it. It was paramilitary, so people have to expect that. You have to be disciplined. You have to listen to them. Your regional training officers, you have to listen. And you just grin and bear it and you just embrace the suck and then you graduate and you're a cop.
Mm-hmm. So you had no idea about what goes on in the academy or any of those things when you applied?
No, I remember just the rocks. It was push-ups, sit-ups, rock. And I only learned that through, I can't even remember his name, an older gentleman that used to come in to Safeway and he was like, oh, you're going to go in the academy? I was like, I'm interested. And he's like, you got to run with rocks because in our academy here, you had to run with rocks. So every PT, you had your buddies, which were your rocks, your right and your left, and you ran with them. You ran everywhere with them. And so I didn't expect, I never shot a handgun. I was never really, I was around gang members who had guns, but I wasn't involved in any of that. I liked fast cars, but I never drove a really fast car. So all of that was shocking to me, but it was so new to me that it was so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where was that grit? There must have been something in you that was really driving you to pursue this profession. Did you think of serving the community or was it, oh, this sounds fun or this is an opportunity? Where was that? What was that you think motivated you?
So I can't remember the year. I think it was maybe 2003. My girlfriend, there was a group of us and we all worked at Safeway together. We were all best friends. We hung out all of the time. And I remember one day I came to work and really nobody was there. Like none of my friends showed up for their shifts, and I didn't understand why. And a few days later, I found out that one of our best friends was raped by our best friend's husband.
Oh.
Yeah. And so it shocked. I mean, it rocked our world, right? We were young and free and wild and careless and had a great time. And then all of a sudden we were just punched in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was where we lived was Alameda County, and Alameda County Sheriff's Office were the ones who did the investigation. And we went to the court proceedings and saw all of the hard work that the deputies did to get this man put away for the rest of his life. And they did an amazing job. And that didn't mean I was going to be a police officer, but that was my drive, was I might as well just do it. If I've made it this far and I can make a difference in anybody's life like they did for her and for us, because we were just so heartbroken. I mean, it tore our friendships all apart. It was devastating. Then I wanted to be that person. I wanted to be the one to go out and be there for women so they could feel heard and valued, even in the darkest places of their lives.
So. That's such an inspiring story, and really take that up and follow it through. I think that's the amazing part of it. Coming back to the statistics that we were talking about, right? It is a very involved career in the sense, not just physically, but also in terms of the bravery or that kind of personality that we imagine the patrolling, or you are in contact with criminals, or, all of that is needed. I'm very curious about the mental part of it. Is it that there are certain type of personalities who will do well, or are you trained to develop that kind of strength of mind and the grit and all of that? Tell me a little bit about it. How does one prepare for that?
I don't think that. So I get this a lot, right? Because we have specific female housing units for female inmates, which mean women have to work in there as deputies. And I always had a sense of confidence. I don't really know where it came from. I know my mother really raised me to be very independent, especially when she found out that I was pregnant. She said, "You will rely on no man and you will get the job done." So my mother was a really driving force in my career and in my life. But as I get to mentor and guide new hires, new female deputies, I mean, I think you have to have some sort of confidence. You have to have some sort of command presence, is what they call it in law enforcement, where you can walk into a room, you're confident, and you can work the room to your advantage. It doesn't have to happen overnight. I have seen female deputies come in here very timid, a little nervous, because in reality, when you're talking to people from a different demographic than where you were raised, it can be a culture shock. So when you're talking to a murderer and he has a very limited vocabulary of a lot of curse words, it can be very nerve-wracking to the soul if you're a short female trying to tell him to lock down. So you have to do what works for you. And I think a lot of that comes with experience and mentorship. I don't think you have to come out here blazing out and trying to be somebody that you're not at all. But for me, I tried it in the beginning. I was like, I'm going to try to be like these guys. I'm going to be hardcore. But it didn't work for me. It actually backfired. The inmates were like, this little girl's, what's wrong with her? Like, she's screaming all the time. And then I realized I think the honey flies with honey. And so I just was myself. I would walk in there. But I walked in there confidently. I never slouched over. Everything from top down, from my hair being done, my badge being polished, my shoes being polished, everything on my duty belt was in great appearance, because that's the first thing you're going to see, right? So for women, you have to be presentable, because we're already fighting an uphill battle. And then with that, I say fake it till you make it. So even if this looks good, but in your head you're going, oh my gosh, there's 300 inmates that I have to control, just fake it. But for women, it can be learned. I've watched amazing female deputies blossom into these wonderful leaders. And makes my heart warm knowing that even though you may have doubted yourself, you got to let other people in because we see something else that you may not see.
Yeah, I mean, as you're speaking, I'm kind of also correlating in my mind a lot of similarities in other
Yes.
industries, right? There is even in like tech, for example, there is this notion of that you need to be this type A aggressive person to be taken seriously as a leader, right? A lot of people mimic this type of a toxic male leadership that we have a lot of examples of. so, so that's really very relatable there. That's why I really liked, I want to read that out, that your LinkedIn status. Leadership is not defined by rank, but your ability to influence others to be great in any circumstance. I really loved that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, let's take a little bit about, okay, you really interested, you went through all the training, you are learning to be courageous, and you are in the force, right, in the agency. What are the challenges that are faced by women in law enforcement? And I really am trying to understand this percentage that we talked about, and especially the declining percentage. What are the challenges that you face in retaining women and really thriving in the workforce?
I think for women, the challenge is if you're too aggressive or you're too loud, then you're considered a B word, right? They label you. If you're not A type and you're timid, then they consider you weak or lacking confidence.
Hmm.
And because there's very few of us, we're always in the spotlight. So you have to find a balance of who you are. So that's a huge challenge. When I was going through all of my early career, learning who I was, even though I started in my 20s, I still didn't know exactly. Nobody still knows who they are, right? It's always a growth. I was
Yeah.
still trying to find out who I was. And it was just really hard because I came in on a time where I was by myself. I was a little female. I wore a lot of makeup. I mean, not to today's standards, because there's a lot of women out there that wear a lot of makeup. But I think it's just hard when it's such a man's world. And like you said, the leadership, and it's fear-based leadership. I think it's also leadership because you're scared of change. You're scared of the unknown and you don't want to be vulnerable. So you put on this facade that you're like this fearless leader, but in fact, you turn out to be a poor leader. So women have to fight that. We have to fight each other because not everybody is friendly, right? And it is a fight to the end. So when I was going through my first initial career choices and wanting to go out to patrol and stuff, it really was getting yourself out there as a woman. And I tried my everything to get out there, but my label was loud and immature. But I wasn't loud and immature. I was just raised in a very loud area. Like my home was loud. My friends were loud. I didn't grow up in an affluent area, right? I grew up in the heart of the Bay Area, right next to Oakland, high crime, high gangs. So I call it the love language. My love language was very different than everybody else's. So it took me longer to get out to patrol than it did other women. But I still hung on. I still pressed forward. I still did everything I could to get out there. I mean, it was discouraging. It was disheartening. But once I got out there, I loved every second of it. I never stopped loving working at the jail, but I definitely didn't. I loved working out in the community, driving a fast car, catching bad guys, putting them away in jail. Like that was the bread and butter of law enforcement back in the early 2000s. Obviously, the climate has changed. And there's a lot of things going on in law enforcement that have to be changed. But for a woman, there's a lot of variables that make it really discouraging. But you have to put on your big girl underwears and you have to push through because if you want it, you got to go for it. You can't just sit in the back burner and pray somebody's just going to go, oh, here you go. It doesn't work that way for women.
It must have been such a sense of redemption when this documentary became viral, and there was so much on the Twitter. Like I could feel that sense of pride, right? When you look at how people were responding to it.
Yeah, I didn't really. So even when case was figured out, like even when the FBI came out and publicly stated that our case was involved and we had the suspect and all these, I didn't really understand the extent of how impactful that was. Because
That's
it was
interesting.
interesting. Yeah. I, Denise and Aaron were not our victims, right? I didn't know I never had taken an interview from them. I never spoke to them. I had only seen them on TV. So when it came out and they did the press release and my lieutenant did a press release and he thanked me, I really didn't know. Like, and still to this day, like I don't, like people will walk up to me out randomly in the stores and say, "Oh, you're my hero." But I don't, my heroes were always on TV wearing capes. So it's really hard for me to correlate that. But then I'm thinking that detective that got my friend's suspect in custody for the rest of his life was my hero. So it was really hard, but it's been almost 10 years since that. It just turned 9 years, right? And it just now is resonating with me on how much I have made a difference and how important women are to
Yeah.
this agent or to law enforcement, actually just to the world, period. I've received so many messages from like Switzerland, Australia, I mean, all over the world of just women, fathers, men saying that there just needs to be more women out there in
Mhm.
in all aspects of life. And I fully agree 110%. But without men, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Because I can push and you can push. We could push people to women to go out there and do things. But the majority of people in professions like yours and mine are men.
Yeah.
So we need supportive men behind us to go, "Oh, she could take it. I don't need it." But men they have an ego and they want to they're driven by ego, right? So they want to take all the credit. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was a collaborative effort on everybody, but it did really validate my husband's poor feelings about the whole case because he had watched me go through all of this, that I actually did something
Mhm.
good. I mean, I have other cases that I'm really proud of, but it
Mhm.
was nice to know that there's good law enforcement officers out there because there sure was a lot of response from them.
Yes, yes. I think that we need men behind them. We also need women who are also able to say, yes, let the other
Yes.
women go
Mhm.
forward as well. I think the sense of redemption or that kind of response was also because there is a sense of despair that you see in that case, which I think a lot of women feel in their respective professional fields. And then there is hope, right? Like there is hope that, yes, this is possible. There is a woman who has gone out there and has done it. I think to me, even if you kind of completely blur out what was the case, what was the context, to me it was that there is a sense of deep despair and then there is hope, right? I think
Mhm.
that's what women need. And that's what women need, that there is hope, and that happens by having role models in every field. I think role models are going to change the narrative.
Yes. Role models. And I actually had a conversation about this as well. It's also, I think, I'm going to age myself again. My mother was raised to be very subservient,
Uh-huh.
very codependent,
Mhm.
and she didn't want that for me. So I also think it definitely starts as you're raising children. Like when I raised my son and he was a boy and everything, I was a cop, so he could relate boy stuff, run chasing bad guys. But for my daughters, I am raising them I don't want to say differently, but it really is. I want them to know as a woman, you have a voice
Mhm.
and that voice is valued.
Mhm.
And so when I watched the Netflix show, I was crying at watching myself. I was like, this lady's amazing, you know? And I'm like, this, that's me, right? Because I really felt like it's going to hurt. You put effort into your life. Like it's a lonely road sometimes being a woman in any profession.
Yeah.
But all that hard work does pay off and
Mhm.
really makes a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Mhm.
But I think families need to support women. Women definitely need to support women because I've seen some women who are ruthless. But then I also think like in all professions, like your profession, my profession, it's a lonely road. And the
Yeah.
more women promote up, the lonelier it gets. So I'm
Yeah.
at the level of lieutenant, and I want to say there's only three. Is there three female lieutenants right now in my agency? I think three. Maybe I'm miscounting. But then even you go higher to captains, I think there's only one female captain. I mean, our sheriff is a female, our undersheriff's a female. So there's females up there, but it's a lonely road. So I think women in all professions should get together and support each other. I don't know any of those groups, and maybe if you do, I'll join them, because I feel like it can be hard because we're expected to be mothers, the ones that go home and do the laundry, that go home and make the meals, but you want to have a career and balance. So there's a lot of pressures about that too. I mean, it's just women, to be a woman is really hard. And I don't think that society gives us enough credit like they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things also is that so much of career has been made so impractical, right? Like there is so much of these narrative around this work hard, play hard, and all these narratives only point at you can have only one of those, right? You can have a career, or you can have family, or you can have those narratives are deep in our societies. I think that also play a role. With that respect, I also wanted to ask, one of the reasons or one of the questions young women may have is that about how do I balance my life if am in law enforcement, if I have to go on patrols in the evenings or nights or timings. Tell me a little bit about that, on how I'm sure there are so many amazing officers there, they do, whether men or women. Tell me a little bit about how one can balance their life and how they can manage and have both.
Oh, so for me, I'm gonna just be really honest with you.
Yes.
I had no balance.
Mhm.
When I first started, and then when I got out to patrol, I had no balance. I immersed myself in law enforcement. Like, I wanted to be in the good old boy club, the one going on pursuits, working all the overtime, doing all these things. So I didn't know balance. And it wasn't until I think maybe 5 or 6 years into it, I realized I was doing way too much. I did so there's a thing in law enforcement where they're like, don't lose touch with your friends who aren't law enforcement. I did it. I lost touch with all of my friends. I only dated cops. I mean, I really was a stereotypical cop at that time. And looking back, I think I just had to go through the process because that's just my personality. But to get balance, you have to have hobbies, family, a good support system outside of law enforcement. If you attend church or you are in a community-based program for people, whatever it is, continue that on, because it's very easy to immerse yourself and get lost in just law enforcement focused. And I was absolutely guilty of that. I definitely put my family on the back burner, my son on the back burner, because it's an adrenaline, right? You're catching mad guys, and the community wants that. So you're driven off of that. But fast forward, when I met my husband, he really reminded me, you have values and beliefs, and they're not all law enforcement. So let's slow down, enjoy life. And then when I had my daughters so late in life, that really changed everything, because I knew I had given up so much relationship with my son just to be able to support him by myself, that now I'm like, I have to be there. You have to just, when you start feeling like you're only wanting to be in law enforcement, you got to shut it down. You got to remind yourself where you came from. But for women, I think it's just hard because then they have kids and they feel like, oh, I can't be a cop anymore. You can absolutely be a cop. I don't care what anybody says. We have women here on patrol. We have our undersheriff is a mommy. Our sheriff is a mommy. Like, captains, we're all moms, and we've all done it, and we've all put in the hard work. So it can be done, but we also have good support system. People to take care of, even if it's just a really good daycare. You have to have a second mom. It definitely does take a village for women to have great careers if you want to be.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because I think that's what makes the difference. A lot of the times narrative becomes, yeah, you need to give up or
Mhm.
you need to pick one. But it is actually really that there are phases where you need to shift your focus where it is needed, right? It needs
Yeah.
to be practical at the end of the day. One other question that I had was about the whole atmosphere you're surrounded. I asked this question. I've interviewed some other professionals in the law enforcement or crime and related areas. One of the things that I always find very curious is what do you do to keep your mind positive and not bogged down by what you see in the society? You are kind of on the front line of witnessing the bad things that happens in the society, which can be very distressing. So what do you do to keep yourself kind of not affected by it? Or is it the practical way to deal with it is just be there and experience it? Like, what do you do?
So for me, it was definitely when I was a detective and when I worked on patrol, working out was my outlet. Like I would
Huh.
work out a lot, probably like because my son was older, I would work out in the morning and I would work out at nighttime. And then for other law enforcement officers, I mean, social drinking or excessive drinking, or there's a lot of things that people deal with stress differently.
Mm.
But my outlet was definitely working out when I was a detective and then I always knew in the back of my head, because I did all crimes against persons, like sexual assaults and crimes against children. And I've seen some stuff, and I know other detectives out there have seen major things, and it really wears heavy on your heart.
Mm.
But knowing that we get to be the advocate, knowing that we get to be the one that they are being completely vulnerable with, and you get to go and you get to face the judge and the district attorney's office and the public defender's office, provide all of the evidence and say, here it is, so lock him up. I think
Mhm,
that's the end goal, and that's so satisfying.
mhm,
I had a conversation with one of my coworkers, and he was a different type of detective. He was in narcotics. And so when we were talking about our investigation experiences, he said he really didn't have that much investment in a lot of his cases because his were all drug related,
mhm,
where you arrest a drug dealer, he gets released. If I had to leave tomorrow from this job, I can honestly look back and go, I know I impacted my community in a positive way. I
mhm,
know that there is a handful of predators out there that will never see the light of day protecting a plethora of girls out there or children out there that will never be touched by that person. Like
mhm,
I can feel I'm okay with what I've done in my career.
mhm,
So the heartache, like my husband was like we have not had, it's been a bumpy road because you invest so much in your career. He's like, I've seen your long nights. I've seen your insomnia, your stressors, your crying, you're fighting, you're trying to scream at the top of your lungs and nobody's listening. He's like, I've seen that. My parents have seen it. My sister and I have had riffs about it. But ultimately, the reason why I do what I do is because I want to protect and serve the community. And I want those girls and those kids out there, even men, to know that one bad guy's off the streets and you can sleep safe tonight. That's what my driving force is. But for
mhm.
the stressors, it definitely is working out.
It must have been such a rewarding feeling as well to have
Yes.
that. That's really amazing, Misty. Finally, I want to ask you for those young girls who would be watching you, who may have kind of back of their mind somewhere that glimmer of interest that they got about law enforcement. What advice would you give them, and how can they prepare themselves to have a successful career? Choose this career and have a successful career.
Is to really research law enforcement and what it is today. Law enforcement in 2024 is different than 2005. Very
Mhm,
different. Obama came out with the 6 pillars of law enforcement. It's guardian versus warrior. You can read all about it. So law enforcement culture is changing. It's
mhm,
unfortunate. Not every cop is bad, but the media has really done some damage, and for good reason, because there's some cops out there that have really done bad things,
mhm,
but we also do great things. I don't want women to feel discouraged. Like, I don't want to be a part of that. But not everybody's a part of that. Like, I can honestly go and work next to all of my partners right now and feel completely satisfied that we're all amazing cops wanting to do the right thing. So I would research the culture in law enforcement today. I would start preparing physically. I would do ride-alongs. I would talk to people in law enforcement, maybe go to a recruiting event and see if you're interested in that agency and look at different agencies. There are some amazing agencies out there that are doing great things for women. And I would just really be prepared that this is what you want. And you could quit if you want to, but I just couldn't imagine going through 6 months of like brutal working out and testing to quit. But mentally prepare yourself too. Like you're not always going to have a pleasant conversation with somebody. I would also, we are very much into being social workers now is what they like to call us, because we have to do there's a lot of people suffering from mental health. So maybe take a psychology class. I know that the colleges offer de-escalation classes, like basic law enforcement, criminal justice, just to see if that's what you're interested in. Because there's so many different branches of law enforcement that it doesn't just have to be patrol. Like you don't have to just go to patrol. If you just want to be a cop and hang out with inmates all day, come to my agency, right? But if you want to go out and do things like that, you can. And also as a young female, don't try to change who you are, right? Never change who or try to be somebody you are not. I could never be a 6'5" man. So I have to work by using my communication skills a lot more than he does. Like I have to coax sometimes a man to turn around and put his hands behind his back, as opposed to this guy can just forcefully do it. And know you're going to be touching people. Know that it's a scary world out there, and you have to have the mindset that you're going to go home every single night. There's just so many things as a young, like I wish somebody would have they did tell me this in the academy, but I was not prepared pre-academy on what to expect. I just really loved everything I did and saw in my agency. I was like, okay, this is really what it is. I would also take a basic writing course, like report writing, because this is all fun and games, making car stops, going on pursuits, but you have to write reports. And those reports are going to be the end all be all for your suspects to either go to jail or prison. And so for like sexual assault investigators, we're writing lengthy reports, sometimes 20, 30, 40 pages, depending on how many victims are involved. Or if it's a homicide, the same thing. So be prepared for that. It's very tedious. But and another thing, always wear sunscreen. Always. It's
Practical,
so fun.
yeah.
But
Practical advice, yes.
yes, when you're driving in a patrol car and you're on for 12 hours and you're in the sun, everything starts to melt off your face, and then your hands can age quickly, and you're pretty much vulnerable to skin cancer, and nobody wants skin cancer. So sunscreen is very important.
What are the ways they can get in touch with? I mean, there is no internships, right? How to be a cop.
Well, there's a lot of agencies that have like a cadet program. So if you're in high school, you can apply to be a cadet. And you get paid by the agency that you're working for. They give you a little outfit, a little uniform. And in our agency, the cadets rotate different duty stations. So they'll go to our patrol, they'll go to the jail, they'll go to the coroner's office, and they learn all of everything on how our agency works. And then there's the cadet, and then there's also the explorer program. So if you're in college, you can become an explorer, and then you can go around cadet or explorers. Either way, the majority of agencies nowadays have that option for teenagers all the way through college to get that experience and then see if they actually like or want to be a cop. I didn't have that. I just did it.
But you are inspiring so many people and then sharing your knowledge. So I'm so thrilled that I was able to have this conversation with you. This has been so amazing. I learned a lot from you, and it's been even more inspiring than from the time that I have set eyes on the documentary. And then I thought, this must be the person that I will interview if I want to talk about female cops. So Thank you so much, Misty, for coming on my podcast and sharing all this information. You really inspired a lot of people.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. For more contents like this, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, or a comment. Thank you for tuning in.